Hello, everybody. Um, so this is one of my first times streaming. I believe I'm streaming right now. Oh, let me just get back to my stream. Can you see me? If you can see me, say hi in the chat. I have one person watching. I wonder who that is. Oh, there's still a couple of minutes to go. And it is now 6 o'clock, and there's still only one person watching. I'm hoping for 3. If I can get 3, I'll be happy. So I'm taking requests today for projects. Any project that my audience asks for, I will provide. Any project that my audience asks for, I will provide. It could be NodeJS, Express, React. Heck, I'm even wanting to do HTML and CSS. Be right back. I can create a to-do list. I can create a chat application, social media, dating. You name it, I will make it. Maybe this person watching now is actually me. Let's see, when did they join? I think I am alone in my live chat. I'm just talking to myself at this point. Oh. A viewer popped in and then popped right out. And we have a viewer. Yay! Hello, viewer. So whoever... Oh, no, never mind. I got excited there. Okay, we're back to 2 viewers. Okay, me and somebody else. Who could this person be? Whoever is on the chat, on the live stream, welcome. I have someone I can potentially entertain. I'm just going to go ahead and... Oh, they left. Hello, audience. I'm just going to go ahead and freestyle create a React app. But what I would really like to do is take a request from the audience. So feel free to request something in the chat and I'll make it for you. So what are we going to make today? You're wondering? Well, what about a to-do list? So this is a blank create React app. Who needs this stuff? A to-do list needs state. We need some kind of persistent data because the user is going to submit their to-do items and we need to display to them and give them the ability to add new to-do items. So if you need state, I suggest you use immer. I am such an immer fanboy. Ask me any questions anytime you guys want to know anything. Initially, there are no to-do items. We're going to create a function that's going to add to-do items. I have these snippets that I use that make it quicker to write code. VS Code snippets are amazing. Highly recommended. So what I like to do is put all my state in one object. And then I use immer to modify that object. So the produce function right here comes from immer. Oh, Uneku Iduma Jogu asks, what's the snippet name? Good question, Uneku. So if you go to File, Preferences, User Snippets, there's going to be two of them. You actually need to add the snippet in both files. Let me show you the React ones. So this is my CAF snippet, which stands for Constant Anonymous Function. Save a const. And we make it equal to a function. That saves a fair amount of typing. I also have one called setState. And this lets me use immer much more quickly. Highly recommended. setState can take a function as an argument, and if it takes a function as an argument, that function is going to be called asynchronously when with the newest value of the state. So this is useful if you're going to call setState several times. And then I have another snippet when I want to call useState. I only have one call to useState in any given component. And it's usually an object. So a function that's going to modify the state with a to-do item name is to call setState, and then we're going to modify state. Notice that here I am modifying an object. I'm modifying an array with push. That's totally fine because we're using immer. So we're going to create a form. We're going to have an input box. And we're going to have a submit button. Furthermore, we're going to have to display all those to-do items. This change handler variable was not defined anywhere. This is kind of an issue. Also, this form needs an onSubmit handler. So this change handler is going to modify the state. So what I would like to do is just do this. Only problem is that this event object is actually going to be destroyed in a very violent way by the time this function is going to be called. So I can't actually write what I just did. Instead, we can just remove the parameter, and then this state is actually going to refer to this variable. And the submit handler is going to take the to-do item in the state and add it like so. Use state is not defined. When you submit anything, you always want to prevent default, otherwise the page reloads. A form, by default, reloads a page when submitted. So we need to tell the event that the form will not resubmit by calling prevent default. So these are my to-do items. I got some weird CSS going on. Let's remove it. Notice in my app component, I have a meaningful state with two properties, items, and types so far. And that's because I decided that I was only going to use one call to use state. And inside I have an object. So this makes debugging so much easier. And there's my to-do list. We can improve it. For example, when I submit, the input box is not cleared. Every time you push, you can clear typed so far. However, if we do that, we need to put a value here. And by adding the value attribute, the content of the input box will be a reflection of state.typed so far. Good. Now, does the audience have any requests? Otherwise, I'm just going to go and make another application. Anything at all? No requests? All right. In that case, let's create a chat application. Now, a chat application is very similar to a to-do list. But there are some differences. Let's go ahead and rename this to add chat item. Let's call this chat contents. So when you add a chat element, unlike a to-do list element, the chat element needs the name of the receiver. So let's go ahead and add the name of the receiver. Of the sender, not the receiver, the sender. I'm just going to assume that Bob is the only one who's going to be chatting here. So Bob is chatting. And Bob will basically say whatever is in the box, the input box. When we display the chats, we need to display the name as well as the content. Contents. Bob says hello, which is great. Hi, Bob. Let's get rid of these LIs, ULs. Let's go ahead and put some divs. Or even better, some p tags. We get some free CSS. And now Bob can chat with himself. Hey, Bob. Hi. Pretty lonely. Bob's feeling pretty lonely. So what we're going to do is every time Bob submits a chat message, he's going to get a response. From Sue. So when Bob says, hey, Sue is going to be like, hey there. That's going to make Bob really happy. And we can look at the component tree and you click on app and you have the two chat lines. Number one, Bob says, hey, and number two, index 0, Bob says, hey, index 1, Sue says, hey there. Fortunately, Sue always says the same thing and she always says it instantaneously. So let's add a delay. Let's make it a little more human. A little more realistic. Unfortunately, we cannot, so this would be the beginner's first impulse. You cannot do this. You cannot do this on so many levels. This is I don't even know what this is going to do. Let's actually try it out. Yeah, so we get a incomprehensible error, which is what I was expecting. What we have to do is call setState again. But in the future. So we're calling setState twice. Notice how the argument to setState needs to be a function. If it's not a function, it's not going to work. Well, after 1 second, Sue says, hey there. Make it bigger. I want you guys to zoom in into this intense interaction between Bob and Sue. Let's see what happens if we don't put a function there. That's right. Things get weird. Let's put a bigger delay to see what's actually going on here. So Bob says, hey, and then 3 seconds later, Sue says, hey there, but she replaces the message that Bob sent. And that's because this state variable right here refers to this state variable. And this setState happens in the future. So this state variable actually refers to the state before it was changed. And the state before it was changed did not have any message from Bob. So let's just put it back. And now we have a delay of 3 seconds. Let's put it to 1.5 seconds. A delay of 1.5 seconds between when Bob types and when Sue responds. What to do next? Well, Sue always responds with the same thing. So what we can do is add a little bit of variety to the content to make it more exciting. And she's going to say one of these 3 things randomly. So, how do we pick a random element out of an array? Math.random is a random number between 0 and 1, not including 1. That's very important. Math.random times exciting variety.length is going to be a random number between 0 and 3, not including 3. And math.floor makes it into a random whole number between 0 and 3, not including 3, which means 0, 1, and 2, which happen to be the 3 indices of our array. And let's go ahead and see if Sue has become more varied in her responses. And she says things like, "Is that so?" And "so interesting." So now Sue has become a realistic AI partner. Shout out to Allah for saying nice with a little winky face. I'm going to winky face back right at you. I have the ability to real life winky face. All right then. Any requests from the audience? If not, I'm just going to continue on this coding train. So now we have this to-do list with a lot of variety and some amazing chat content. And this is going to help Bob feel a little less lonely, which is always nice. So let's go ahead and do this in Redux because, hey, why not? Everyone loves Redux. So I need to add the two libraries, Redux and React Redux. And then I'm going to add a file which I will call store.js. So I'm going to import the store, import create store. I'm going to create the store, and then I'm going to export the store. I called it items. Items is fine. I'm going to need a reducer. I'm also going to use immer because I love immer. And immer makes your reducer so much nicer. So now we got a store. The store has a reducer. The reducer expects at most one action type, which is add chat item. And that particular action is going to add a chat item to our global store. There's also this init action type, which is just always dispatched by Redux. There's nothing we can do about it. We need to handle this case. And we're going to export this store. In our app class, we are going to need to get that data from the store. And the way we get data from the store in Redux, at least in the newest versions of Redux, is by using our little friend uSelector. We will not be getting the items from the local state of the component in the virtual DOM. Instead, we will be getting the items from the global store. Furthermore, we will no longer be pushing those elements to the local component state. Instead, we will be dispatching an action that is going to go to the reducer. The reducer is going to return a new state for us. We need to change it here and also here. So the set timeout. Oh, Allah says, "Oh my God, you are so good. Allah, you are too kind." But if you also want to get good at coding, you can check out wakata.io. Check out wakata.io. Where was I? Oh, yes. The payload is just going to be no, thank you, Allah. Allah says, never heard of it, thank you. Just responding in a completely natural way. We need to import the store from our little store file. Also, we need a provider. This line is important right here. If you don't have a provider, then our use selector will not know. Use selector will not know from which store it needs to get the information from. So to link your store to your app, we need to use the provider component. So I've just written a ton of code. Store does not contain a default export. Good point. So I need an export default, and on the right-hand side of the export default, we have an expression, which happens to be a function call. Dispatch is not defined. So if I look at app.js, I see that I called dispatch twice, once here and once here. It's actually going to be store.dispatch. I need to make sure to import the store. Unknown action type at Redux init. Okay, so Redux does throw some pretty weird stuff at me. And we have our application, and it works. No store found. This is because I need to add some kind of magic voodoo to my create store. So let's just go ahead and find this magic voodoo. And it's this magic right here. Thanks to that, we now have access to the store and the state of the store inside our Redux dev tool, which is super key when you're debugging. If you're trying to debug, you don't have Redux dev tools, and you're using Redux, you're going to have a hard time. Any requests from the audience? Unless you want me to continue on this coding train. All right, I'll just continue. We have a chat front-end application. So let's add a little bit of back-end to it. Oh, it's not going to be a React app. It's just going to be a normal project. Sounds exciting. I know. I know. It is exciting. That was a message from Ala Lebedeva. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. needs to yarn init-y, and the only library we will be using is Express. And our good friend body parser. Create a file. Let's give it a name. I like this name. Descriptive. Descriptive names are important. Oops. I have not done any backend work in like weeks. I believe that's it. Let me just check if this magic formula is correct. Might just be type. We're going to go ahead and run this backend server on port 4000. I'm using NodeMon to run the server because NodeMon makes your life so much easier. Highly recommended. Xenia writes, I never do backend, so let's go slow and easy. I agree, Xenia. If you want me to go even slower and easier, you can ask a lot of questions. That would help me out and help out everyone else who's watching. So please keep the questions or comments. Hey, winky faces. I love winky faces. So if you give me a winky face, I'm going to slow down to look at the winky face. Xenia writes, I will. You know it. Oh, I know it. I know it. So we have an app.post. Oh, the winky face. Wink right back at you. Xenia just gave me a winky face. So we're going to create an endpoint right here. We're going to give it a name. And this endpoint is going to take a chat item. And the assumption here is that we're going to be sending a JSON formatted string from the front end to the back end. And that string is going to be in rec.body. And then we're going to push it to the array. And then we're just going to send back a very generic message to the front end to indicate that the operation was successful. The front end is probably not going to do anything with this message. Content is going to be an object with two properties, name and content. It's actually pretty confusing. Let's call it item. So this is our endpoint to add items. And it's a good idea to just put some console logs in there, especially if you're not used to doing this. It'll really help you debug. We're going to use an application called Postman to test our endpoints as we are writing them. And the reason is because if you don't test, then there are bugs that appear, and debugging can be very hard. So I strongly encourage everyone in the audience to test early and test frequently. As they say, a stitch in time saves 9. Running on localhost 4000 and the endpoint is add item. We're going to send an HTTP request to our backend server. And the body of the HTTP request is going to be a JSON formatted string, which is a very specific format. Property names need to be in double quotes. So we're sending a request to our backend and we're getting back success true. Promising. If you look at the console log, we see that yes, items is an array and it contains our chat item, like we had hoped. And then we can add another message. And we see there are 2 elements in our array now. So we know our endpoint is working properly. That's how we get information into our items array. Now we need a way to get information, to read the information in the array. We'll use app.get for this. You can give it any name you want. Some people are super pedantic about names and how things should be named. It's probably a good idea in a company to be a little pedantic. But when you're practicing and you're just trying to get the concepts down, don't worry about names too much. As long as it's understandable to you, that's what counts. And in the response of this particular endpoint, we're actually going to send back the JSON formatted string version of our items array. So some people might be wondering, why don't we just send back the array itself? Well, you're always sending back a string or something that can be easily converted to a string, like a number. Even then, do not send numbers back. JSON.stringify can take any value and convert it to a string. So it's really good for communication purposes. I see the answer to the second question right now. There's a second question. Xenia, this is what Xenia wrote. Xenia Nadkina, I'd like to know more about this second question. So if you have any questions or you want to tell me about the second question, I'm here to listen. Do not forget the slash at the beginning of your endpoint names. If you forget the slash, it's not going to work. Let's go ahead and add an item. And then we're going to create a new tab to get the items. And we get the items. So this is a string that represents an array that contains one element. Oh. So Xenia wrote two questions. I am unable to see it in the chat. Oh yeah, very good question. I really like this question, Xenia. You define items as a const, but it's mutable, right? Shouldn't it be a let? I love this question. So this items variable is not reassigned anywhere. This variable contains a reference to an array. You can mutate the array as much as you want, but you cannot reassign the variable. So for example, I could not do this. Because I'd be changing the content of the array. So items always refers to the same array, but that array may change over time. And there's no way in JavaScript to stop the array from mutating. So to summarize, const refers to variables, not the things that variables point to or refer to. Good. So we have our two endpoints, add item and items. So back in front-end world, we did all this effort to get a nice store and Redux and all that jazz. But what we're actually going to do is send it to the backend. I'll retrieve it from the backend. And we need to do a fetch request to send something to the backend. Localhost 4000 / add item, I believe. And it's a post, and the body is just going to be like so. That's going to send a fetch request to the backend. We can add await because we have an async. Fetch without an await returns a promise. So this returns a promise, and we need a way to get to process the information once the promise has resolved. So we can add an await, and that's going to return a response object. What about headers? Good question. What about headers? In this particular case, there are no headers to add. Now, sometimes you may want to set the content type header. What I did was I just made it so that body parser processes the HTTP request no matter what the content type is. It's kind of a hack. I would not recommend doing this in a company, but for our purposes, it's perfectly fine. So we're going to get the response object. And then from the response object, we can get the body as a string. And once we have the body, actually in this particular case, the body is not really useful. Let's go ahead and delete all this stuff. And this random exciting variety will be actually added in the backend. Makes a little more sense to do on the backend. So when we add an item, we're going to do a set timeout. So that 1,500 milliseconds after the backend receives the HTTP request to add the chat item to the array, it's then going to add the Sue's response, exciting response to that array after a delay. The server response time is your timeout. The 1,500 milliseconds. So that's actually going to happen asynchronously. So the res.send is going to happen immediately. So there's no chance of a timeout. That's how you add items. And let's just go ahead and make sure that it actually works. It's a good idea to test frequently. Highly recommended. If I could find my application. Oh, there it is. Right in front of me. So I wrote, hey, and I already see some red stuff going on. Access to fetch at so-and-so. CORS policy. No access control, allow origin. Oh my God. What is all this red stuff? We can actually theoretically ignore it, but we won't. But that's because the server is local. So Xenia writes, that's because the server is local. I'm guessing it is in regard to this res.send and the set timeout. Correct me if I'm wrong. This actually has nothing to do with the server being local or remote. The res.send will always be immediate. Res.send will happen before the items.push. Happens first, and then 1.5 seconds after the server has responded. I hope that clarifies that particular point, Ksenia. Keep the questions coming. Is there a practical application to set timeout? Good question. Very good question. Do I use set timeout sometimes? I do. On the back end, I use set interval more than I use set timeout, to be honest. But on the front end, you can do things like refresh a component at regular intervals with set timeout. So you can have an effect that updates the state every 1500 seconds, for example. That being said, you could also do a set interval. What's nice about set timeout is that you can put a cancellation very easily in React. I am confused. I thought it was just to humanize the response, writes Ksenia. It is to humanize the response. So this code right here is to humanize the response. However, the code is run, well, this particular function is called after the HTTP response has been sent. The HTTP response is ignored anyways. What we care about is this particular request. This endpoint is the one that's going to send back the items of the chat. So we care about the timing of this endpoint. We don't care so much about the timing of this endpoint. The response is ignored. So it doesn't really matter when the response is sent. Good. So I hope that answered that particular question. Keep them coming. I love questions. So this red stuff right here, blocked by cores, access control, Chrome is not happy. Very easy way to make Chrome happy. You install a package. Oh. Another question from Ksenia. Why you don't send items on line 28 instead of success true? Good question, Ksenia. If I did that, it would not have the response from Sue. That's the only reason why we don't send the items back. The updated items. So the items array will be updated 1500 milliseconds after the response is sent back. I guess we could just do something like this. That might be what you are referring to. The issue with that is you never ever want an HTTP request to have a 1500 millisecond delay. There are several reasons for this. Quite a few actually. One of the reasons is that you're only allowed a very limited number of HTTP requests from the client, from the browser. So if the HTTP request lasts a long time, for example, 1500 milliseconds, and let's say Bob sends 20 messages in a very short period of time, some of those messages are going to get lost. Well, the messages themselves are not going to get lost, but the response is. So you never want to put a res.send in the callback of a set timeout that lasts a long time. I hope that answers your question, Ksenia. Okay, so we're going to get to cores now. So we were looking at this particular console and it was red. And we were not happy and Chrome was not happy. So we installed a library called cores. And then we just use cores. And this gets rid of the red stuff. No more red stuff. Yay. Our chat is not getting updated, which is something we're going to fix. But we see here that the HTTP request did actually reach our server and that the items array was updated. So that's very promising. The second part is going to be getting the data from the server. In other words, the items endpoint needs to be called. And to make this a little more realistic, we're going to assume that we don't know when the chat messages are coming. So we need to constantly send fetch requests to that endpoint at regular intervals. We're going to call fetch returns a promise. To be able to process this promise, we need to use await. There are other ways, but await is by far the easiest. We're going to get the, that's the response object. We're going to get the response body. By calling the text method of the response object, which returns a string representation of the HTTP response body. And we're going to take that response body and we're going to stick it in the store. The response body is actually going to be an array. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new action type whose only purpose is to take an array and completely replace all the items in the state by this new array. The response body is a string because we call the .text. We call the .text method, which returns a string. We need to convert this string to a JavaScript value. And the way you can convert a string to a JavaScript value is by using json.parse. And we're going to call it every 100 milliseconds. So every 100 milliseconds, our chat front end is going to send an HTTP request to the backend to get the latest chat messages. Once it gets those chat messages, it's going to send an action to the reducer. The action type is replace items. The reducer is then going to take this action and return a new state. And the items property of that state will now refer to the payload of the action, which is the response body after it is processed by json.parse. So we have an error, unexpected token, something or other. Let's go ahead and check out the, right. So this is localhost 4000. We were sending a request to localhost 3000, which is actually where our React backend server was running. Reducer.dispatch is not a function. It is store.dispatch. Store is not defined. Oh, yes. Now store is defined. Oh, store is not defined. And we have all the messages right here. Hey, I'm going to say hey again, and then Sue's going to respond with, is that so? And every time I reload the page, you see here that the chat still works. So now you have a persistent chat. Any questions from the audience or any requests? All right then, let's continue this coding train. So, right now all the items are being stored in random access memory, so temporary memory. If I reload this server, which I just did by saving it, because NodeMon reloads the server every time you save a file. And I did that, and now my chat is empty. So we have no persistence. Let's go ahead and add persistence, which means that if I restart my server, all the data will still be there. We'll be storing this data in a file, and to access files, we use the fs module. We'll be reading a file called chatmessages.txt, which will contain all the messages that have ever been sent or received by the client. I'm using under dir name in case I'm running the server from another directory. So under dir name does not take into account where you're running the program, is only taking into account where this particular file is located. And I'm calling toString to convert this, which is a buffer, into a string. The only issue here is that if the file does not exist, this is going to throw an exception. To fix that, we're going to put this assignment inside a try-catch block. Initially, the persistent content variable refers to undefined. And then, if the chatmessages.txt file exists, fs.readFileSync is going to return a buffer that contains the contents of that file. Then toString is going to convert the buffer to a string. If there is an error, if an exception is thrown, we don't do... Oh, actually... we don't do anything if there's an error. And in that case, persistent content is going to be the empty array. Not undefined, the empty array. Because I changed it. In fact, let's just go ahead and call it items. Because we already used that name. So every time we modify that array, we need to save it. And that will make sure that if the server restarts, we're going to reload the latest version of items. And this will write to the file chat messages. Let's go ahead and send a message. And we see here that indeed all the messages we're sending from Bob are being saved. You can see the messages being updated in real time. Let's go ahead and restart the server. Well, that just killed my demo. For some reason, items was not initialized to the proper value. Oh, right. So items actually needs to be parsed. We're not even... Actually, let's console log the error. Assignment to constant variable. So this is very relevant because of a question that Xenia was asking. Right, here we have const, and then after const we have a reassignment. So that's illegal. That's the whole purpose of const. To be honest, const is not as useful as most people make it out to be. I rarely run into bugs where I think to myself, wow, I should have used const. Running on port 4000, let's go. Good, and now my items are set. Items.map is not a function. I apologize, sir, client. There we go. And we have persistent messages. And Xenia writes, magic, exclamation. And I agree. This is magic. So we have a front end, we have a back end, and the back end is persistent. Any requests from the audience or questions? Uneku writes, yeah. Anything you would like me to add to this particular chat application? All right then. In that case, I'm going to add a way for the user to customize his own username. So right now we have a hard-coded name of Bob. So what we want to do is when the application loads, we want to ask Bob his name. Well, not Bob. We want to ask the user their name. We have several options here. Let's go with use effect. Only because it will help you learn use effect, which is a pretty useful thing to learn. Use effect runs after the component is mounted, which means after the DOM has been generated from the component. If the second argument to use effect is the empty array, then the particular function is only run once. We can use window.prompt to ask the user for their username. And then we can use our good old friend setState to modify the state to reflect this new username. Fun fact, since the username is not displayed anywhere in the component, there are actually several ways we could have achieved this particular result. setState works just fine. Instead of the Bob string, we're now going to send state.username. What shortcut did you use to get lines 16 and 17? Xenia asks. Good question, Xenia. So she's referring to this long magic formula. I'm using something called VS Code snippets, which lets you generate a lot of code with very few keystrokes. You type in the abbreviation of the snippet and you press the tab key and it will generate everything for you. I created my own snippet in preferences, user snippets. and this is the particular snippet, which I've called SS. Snippets are very useful, and I highly recommend that you add a few, especially for things that are long and repetitive. Xenia writes, whoa, I know, right? They're so cool. Share, please. I don't know how to share. I wish there was a way for me to put some code snippets. Let me try putting on, I'll put on Google Drive for you all. So I'm currently uploading my snippets file to Google Drive to share it with the people. The people deserve snippets. Any day now. Google Drive, you can do it. There we go. Wow, this is really slow. And for Xenia and anyone else who wants snippets, these are mine. The one for 4 is super, super useful, because 4 is really repetitive, it's long, and it's easy to make a mistake. That's the perfect storm. A lot of bugs happen because of for loops that are not properly written. So when I write a for loop, I just write for, and then I can write things like I is 0 and I is less than. And then I can start coding. You can also have some nice import snippets, which I was really excited to create, but then didn't actually use that much. Maybe I'll start using it more soon. Uneku writes, I think you should do a short one on creating VS Code snippets. So cool. That's a pretty good idea, Uneku. I'll have to think about it. I think a lot of people could benefit from snippets. Ah, yes. Window.prompt. All right. Message use effect is not defined, of course. What is your username? Eric. Hey, Bob. And now we have Bob, Sue, and Eric are having this amazing conversation. Sue is definitely into it. I can create another tab. And Roxanne's going to join this conversation. And then we have Bob, Sue, Eric, and Roxanne, and they're all having a party. This is wonderful. Xenia writes, merci. Xenia seems to be francophone. I'm just going to write back, you're welcome. The CSS is not really nice. It's pretty zoomed in, but let's make it a little nicer, shall we? And this will be the last part. I'll be using inline style tags. Oh, this prompt is going to get annoying. Let me remove the prompt. I'm going to use inline style tags because I'm feeling a little lazy, but you should really do it in your CSS file and use class names. I'll leave it up to the audience to rewrite this using .css files. So this form on the bottom, we want the form to be, we want the form to always be on the bottom. So we can add a style attribute and then put position fixed. 5 pixels from the bottom, 5 pixels from the left, 5 pixels from the right. Why not? So now the whole form is going to take the bottom form element, and we can do display flex, and on this input we can have style flex bottom. And we see here that the input is taking up a lot of space, and that the whole thing is near the bottom of the screen. It's always going to be at the same space, at the same place. So it no longer moves around, which is a little nicer from the perspective of the user. Let's go ahead and put some padding on the chat messages. A little better. Chat messages are a really good candidate for tables, in my opinion. I like it when things line up. I don't know about you guys, or girls, audience in general. But I really enjoy that when things line up. You may be wondering, what happens if a username is really long and it takes up the whole line? And then everyone's messages take up a lot of space. And that is not a good user experience, right? So if my name was, let me put back the prompt. If my name was something with, oh, for some reason I cannot type here. Oh, there we go. If my name was something really long and I type something, all the text moves to the right. So that's not the best user experience. What we can do is, on this TD, we put a style with width and a text overflow. For some reason, it is not overflowing. Let me put it in a div. Worse? Much worse. Oh my God. Okay. Oh, we need to put overflow hidden. That was the issue. And white space. No wrap. We're getting there. There we go. And we're going to put it on the TD itself. We're going to put it in a span. Well then, a div kind of worked. Let's just keep it as a div. Yes, there we go. So now we have all the messages are nicely lined, and if a name is too long, he has an ellipse. That was way longer than I was expecting. So that ends our stream. Thank you for being a part of my first live stream, where I get to code and hopefully entertain and educate and help you guys out in this turbulent time that we live in. My streaming schedule is posted right here. Monday, Wednesday from 6 to 8. Sunday from 1 to 3. Tuesdays are special. I take requests from the audience for HTML and CSS. So that's going to be fun. Ala writes, Arigato gozaimashita. Thank you too, Ala. And Unaku writes, thank you. So it was a pleasure to have you, and I hope to see you in my next streams. Do not forget to subscribe. Have a nice evening or day.